Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, everyone, and good evening to those people who have joined us. I hope you've all had a good day and survived the scorching weather over the last couple of days. I'm glad it's a little bit cooler today, and I'm really glad that I've got a guest with me today, a very knowledgeable guest. We're going to get into some things on culture and school improvement. I've got Dr. Jon Morris with me today. Good evening, John. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries. No worries. You are very, very welcome. And like I said, hopefully we'll get into some things which people will find useful and interesting. We are obviously live across a few platforms. You can obviously listen and watch this as a podcast as well later on. So look out for that. So we're on Teachers Talk Radio, and this is the Twilight Show. Thanks so much for joining me once again. And obviously to John for coming along, giving up his time. We know that how busy things can be when you work in schools, as John still does. Now, we'll say, before we get into it, we'll just say a little bit about sort of your background, John. So I'll just, from what I can gather, you are a current head teacher. You have a PhD in education, I believe. I did do a little bit of homework
That's good to see.
on John. I did print something off, but then of course I left it on my desk at work. So I've done the opposite of what the kids do. I did it at work, but forgot to bring it. But I did, what was quite interesting when I was doing a little bit of research and homework into John, was I found that I think there's going to be some things there that will resonate with a lot of people. So did you want to just say a little bit about sort of your experience sort of to date, John, and anything that you sort of, in terms of your role at the moment and previous experience and stuff?
Yeah, so I've been teaching for kind of in the teaching game for almost 20 years and worked in a number of schools. And kind of during that time, just became increasingly interesting in comparing schools. I think something we all do as teachers, we kind of compare it, whether the grass is greener at another school or you don't want to work at this school. I think I became interested comparing actually what makes one school different from another. What are kind of the reasons for that? And that led me to pursue my doctorate in organisational culture and looking at the culture of schools. And to go on quite a long journey, because I did it part-time with 2 young children at the time who were screaming, Daddy, play with me, Daddy, do something with me. And I'm there way working on this kind of doctorate. But I think if you're passionate about something and it relates to you, kind of what you do, you just get absorbed by it all. Just becoming increasingly interesting, actually. What is school culture? How do we examine it? How do we assess it? How do we explore it? And then more recently, kind of moving into headship in the last year, actually, and doing kind of courses which look at culture, which is kind of why I'm here, because I'm trying to start a little bit of a debate in terms of what culture is, because I think I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective than what we're seeing at the moment, because I think there's a lot of, I kind of call them sales pitches where we reduce culture down to one word, and I see it all the time in toxic cultures, learning cultures, power cultures. I have even because I was just googling it to look at kind of different slogans that were coming up. I even saw one person saying, "This is the one thing missing from your culture," And you're like, well, if there was one thing missing, then surely we'd all have these fantastic organisations and schools which run flawlessly. So I feel that there's been this massive reductionist approach in that we're taking something hugely complex and kind of reducing it down into kind of the bare bones. And I suppose the easiest way to kind of illustrate that point is, and I've done different ways to discuss this argument, but is talking about Star Trek. So follow me now. I don't know whether you're a Star Trek fan, but you got to follow me on this journey, okay? See, I grew up as a huge Star Trek fan. I used to watch it with my dad, watch Next Generation. You know, I was absorbed. You know, I used to watch all those episodes. That had me, and I was geeking out to all of it, right? And there's one episode that I think really illustrates the difference between of what culture is. So in this one episode, you have, I don't know whether you've seen it. Have you seen Star Trek? Am I on my own here?
I'm gonna upset you already, John. I'm not. Yeah, it's not something I'm very familiar with.
After this, you need to go and binge
get
watch
straight
it.
on there. Yeah,
right? It'll change your life. It'll change your life. So I tell you, I'm going to get you into this. Afterwards, you're going to love it. So you've got the crew, right? They're going around the galaxy. You know, this is what they do, seeking out new life, new life forms. And there's this one episode where Commander Riker, who's the second in command, he's given this kind of exchange program, and he said, right, you're going to go and do this exchange program on this Klingon ship. So he's given this task of going onto this Klingon ship, and surely, come on, tell me you know what a Klingon is.
Well, I'm guessing they're the bad guys, aren't they?
I tell you, you've got a lack of knowledge here.
I'm so sorry. Are they the baddies? See, this is, I'm like entry level here. You're going to have to...
really entry level. Yeah, they're okay.
You're going to have to do some adaptive teaching here, John. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, listen, it's my job to kind of bring you up. Okay, I'm teaching to the top here. I'm teaching to the top. So they're right, the bad guys, and this is exchange program where the friends. So he has to kind of go as his exchange program. So the first thing he does is he starts to kind of research the Klingon race. So he gets their kind of Klingon food, he's eating their food, and he's kind of researching their kind of what the expectations of what that is. He then, on arriving on this Klingon ship, he has to learn things about their uniform, he has to learn things about their rank, their language. On top of that, he's then learning about what the expectations are of serving there. He even gets attention from the opposite sex on this ship. So there's all these things that are happening. So in looking at culture just from that point of view, I could be talking to you about culture from the point of the Commander Riker officer researching kind of what it means to be a Klingon by sampling the dishes. I could be talking about culture from his social interaction. I could be talking about culture from him understanding what the role of being a Klingon officer, or I could be talking about culture in terms of just the whole Klingon race. So just in illustrating that point, there are so many avenues in terms of what culture is, just by exploring that one example. I think what we mean when we talk about culture in schools is we mean a very, very specific type of culture, and that's organizational culture. And what we do is we just shorten it for simplicity because it's just easier. But what we're talking about is actually what is the culture of an organization, and that's really specific. But I think what we've more recently done is we've taken a kind of view of culture which is more of a society and reducing things from an anthropological approach to one word phrases, the power culture, the learning culture, and we're applying that to the culture of a huge organization. Now, what makes up the culture in an organization? It's the people. It's the people, it's the collective. And because it's a collective, because it's all the people, you can't reduce it to one words. So an example might be if I said to you, right, you've got your new I don't know, year 9 class coming in, you have to assign them one word, and that one word has to stick with them for the rest of the academic year. You've reduced the complexity of a person down to one word or a one word name tag. And that's what I kind of feel is happening at the moment with culture. Is we're taking this huge complex entity and we're kind of reducing it down to one word phrases because it's simple, because it's quick. But if I was to kind of do that for a class or even for a leadership team, saying, right, you've got one word I'm going to call you, it'd probably be highly offensive. But essentially, it's this huge reductionist approach which just simplifies absolutely everything. So the kind of where I'm kind of coming at from that point of view is, I just feel that in simplifying it, we're sort of kind of missing what culture is, and that's kind of my argument that I'm coming through from it. In that, I think we need to kind of just stop a minute and really unpick what culture is before we start to describe or define it.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. Thank you for that, because you've basically, I think, answered my first question, which was to sort of get to the bottom of like what we mean by culture. But I mean, for me, culture is very much something that I think at the moment at my place is something that we're grappling with, because we're trying to turn a school around that's failing at the moment, to be quite honest. We're making some progress with that just recently. Fortunately, the good news is it does feel like we're making progress. But some of the cultures at our school are very ingrained. So culture isn't something that is easy to change, I don't think. I mean, we've got cultures, for example, we've got a no snitch culture at our school. So if there's a problem, if there's bullying or there's anything going on that's inappropriate, it's very, very difficult to get the victims of it to actually talk about it, because they fear the consequences. In all honesty, I'm sure this is something that comes into all schools, but it's very, very ingrained. I was talking to a young lady today, and I said, look, you're clearly not very happy what's going on. And she said, I can't say because then they win. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And in the end, we got to the point that she knew that if she became a grass, then she'd lost face. So, I mean, I'm going in depth on a particular example, but I think for me, culture is something that, as you say, is very multifaceted. And what you're saying, maybe, I don't know, I'm just trying to pick apart what you're saying, is maybe some leaders go very top down on culture, whereas culture is more bottom up than top down, if you know what I mean.
I 100% agree, because it's about the people. The people in the organisation make the culture. So actually, to take a really small part of an organisation, which might be the kind of head or the deputies or the leadership, and kind of then say, right, well, we're going to change it. Actually, because it's all about the people. It's that kind of the largest group, the kind of layer at the kind of bottom, for want of a better word, that is the head, is the culture. That's what it is. And I think also an element of culture is it's ingrained in the history. So if there's this history of no snitching or no grassing, whatever it is, that's been ingrained for years. It's part of the history of that organisation. So because of that, that's why it's so difficult to change, because that's the way it's always been. And one strategy or one initiative isn't going to do it. It isn't going to change. It's like turning the Titanic or it just isn't going to happen. And I think that's why it's so stubborn and so difficult to kind of change. I think my biggest bugbear is when leaders come in from, perhaps they might have been successful at one school, and that's fantastic, and I'm not knocking that. It's hard, it's a hard business, but then think they can apply the same approaches to a different school, and actually the culture and the context will be so different. I think sometimes leaders need to spend more time kind of really assessing before you do. And the kind of thing that I think I've spoken about before is talking to people, and I've said some of the best people to speak to in your organization in terms of understanding the culture is people like your cleaners, your catering staff. They've often been there the longest, and to a certain degree, sometimes there can be unseen heroes, who just quietly get on doing their job. People that actually, without you couldn't run the school. The first people that I kind of see when I go into a school is like your catering staff, your site staff, because they're the people that get it done, right? They're the people that make it so you can do your job. So that's the group you want to talk to. When you're coming into a school, you want to understand the history of the school, which is a really important part of the culture. Is how do we kind of get to where we are? And I think that group that we need to talk to. There's this really interesting book which is called Turnaround Ship, where essentially there's this submarine captain, David Marquette, I think his name is, and he's been told, right, you're going to be this nuclear submarine captain in the United States. It's coming up. You've got like a year's prep, so he's prepping away, and he's well up for it. He's got this great nuclear ship that he's going to become the captain of. And really, last minute, they say to him, actually, we're changing the ship that you thought you were going to get. And on top of that, the ship you're going to get, it's considered to be the worst performing ship in the fleet. And he actually turned it round. Now he knew nothing about this particular nuclear submarine. They're all different. They've all got their different dynamics and schematics and setups. Now, he knew absolutely nothing. But what he did was he just spoke to people and he just asked them question after question after question. And he turned it into the most successful, or one of the most successful ships in the fleet. And it's a really interesting book. But I think that illustrates that actually, in order to change the culture, it's just having conversation after conversation after conversation to really assess everything, and to get as much information about, because culture is about the history, it's about the stories, it's about the architecture, it's about the symbols. There's so many elements that come together to create the culture that the more information you have, the more you understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, the different stakeholders, the different subcultures, the reception staff and the cleaning staff and so on. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's a really interesting point you raise about subcultures, because I think often when we're looking to change culture, I think we assume this monocultural entity. We assume that it's just this one homogenous group of people. And actually, I think you're totally right, because part of my doctoral studies was I looked at subcultures. So I did this kind of case study on this academy, and I compared different groups in the organisation. So I looked at this. I interviewed a whole load of senior leaders. I did these focus groups with middle leaders, and then I did these interviews with staff. And what was really interesting is they each had a different perception of the organisation. And they each had different views on how well the school was being run or what their gripes were. And that's because each group is coming at things from a totally different perspective. So I think another really interesting thing to kind of note with culture is not assuming that it's just one homogenous group, that there are so many different layers that we kind of need to unpick. Whether it's your ECTs will have a really particular view, whether it's your admin, whether it's your pastoral staff, your SLT, your cleaners, have said, the catering, each of those will have a piece of that puzzle. And the kind of the way I kind of visualize it is the culture is like a 10,000 piece jigsaw that you're putting together, and you need all these different pieces from all these different groups to get a view of what it is.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. And obviously with the pressures leaders are under, I suppose you can sort of understand why they may want to do that the easy way or the quicker way. So that makes an awful lot of sense. Before we move on, I just want to say to everyone, we're live on Teachers Talk Radio, and this is the Twilight Show. I've got Dr Jon Morris with me this evening, and we are talking about culture in schools. And I also just want to mention, if you are looking for another education podcast, then you should check out Chalk and Talk with Anna Stocky. Anna is a passionate advocate for evidence-based maths education for students of all ages. On her podcast, she talks about everything from effective teaching methods and how-to guides for teaching math facts to tips for evaluating research shows claims. She brings on top-notch guests, educators, researchers, and policymakers, and discusses issues that directly impact teachers and students. Chalk and Talk is for anyone interested in education. Find it wherever you get your podcast. So that's the Chalk and Talk podcast. I'd also just like to mention, before John and I crack on with the next sort of facet when we're talking about our culture in schools, I also want to mention that this isn't the school, but this show is sponsored by the John Catt Bookshop. And if you are interested in leveling up your professional development, then you can have a look at the John Cat Bookshop. And if you do so, you can get 20% off your order by using the code JCTTR2425. And you can see that there on the screen. Okay, that was a lot of jabbering on from me there.
What a bargain, 20%.
It's not bad going, is it? It's not bad going.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff on there too. I noticed that Tom Sherrington's what they call read-throughs are on there. They're really good. We've used those a lot with RCPD, with the Rose and Shines principles and all those things. So check that out and have a look. And also, while I remember, I just want to thank anyone who's watching live at the moment. Remember that if you are watching live and you want to comment on something that John and I raise, then there is a comment box. Should be somewhere at the bottom of your screen, and you can put a comment on there, and John and I will address it. Keep it clean, guys, but we'll have we'll have a look at that now. So, John, as I was saying earlier, I had a few questions that I wanted to ask. I'd done a little bit of sort of research, but we're talking about this idea that culture isn't a simple thing, and the fact that when leaders go into schools, they feel under pressure. Perhaps maybe they have I mentioned the school I'm at now. You might feel that you're on a bit of a schedule. We have Ofsted due kind of any minute to have a look at our place. They could be in July or maybe even September, but it's one of those ones where you're forever waiting for that phone call. But obviously, something that I find interesting about what John has put out in terms of his opinion is this idea that you can't really improve the school without understanding the culture. So I suppose my question is, what would you advocate, John, in terms of what leaders could do to sort of understand culture a bit better in their school? What sort of things would you be encouraging those leaders to do if they're thinking, I really need to know a bit more about what's actually going on here?
I suppose the point I would make, just to preface that, is that I think you can improve a school without changing the culture. So you can put change in. I think when you've really changed the culture, the school will run without, for instance, the leadership team. So if they're the head and the deputy, or in the leadership team, that's just for argument's sake, they're all taken out. They're all going on jolly or whatever it is that they're doing. If the school continues and is productive, and is safe and secure, and all those benchmarks we look for, and that continues over time, then there is an ingrained culture in that. What we mean by that, these are the unwritten rules, these are what we do. So I think you can improve a school, and I think there are examples of leaders that come in, they'll turn things around in 18 months or whatever it might be. Ofsted will come in, give them their tick seal of approval, but what will happen is, if a few of those key players are taken out, you find that the systems, the processes start to erode and the school starts to decline. And that's because we don't have a culture which is self-generating. The school isn't running effectively. And I think that's the thing to be aware of, that even though a school might have improved, it doesn't mean the culture's changed. And I think that's an important point to kind of make, because I think there are examples of schools where they do superficially appear to have improved or running effectively, but actually it doesn't take an awful lot for those to decline. And I think that's when we really know that culture perhaps hasn't changed. But I understand why that is. With the way the Ofsted framework is, and whatever your view of Ofsted is there is a huge pressure to improve a school, and I think that's why we kind of reduce things with culture, and I think that's why there's an oversimplification that we're going to change things quickly, because we have those kind of those KPIs, those benchmarks that things have to be done. I think if some of the things that leaders can do is really consider all the different elements of a school. So one important element that I have looked at in my doctorate to do with culture is like the architecture. So what does the architecture suggest about the school? Did you remember the Building Schools for Future programme? That was quite big, and it was culled by Gove in his wisdom. He cut all the funding, but there was at some point there was some investment, and lots of schools were lots of leaders were designing these schools, and I had the opportunity to go around loads and observe different schools, and some of them had these huge atriums of space that were there. That now you'd be thinking, oh my word, look at all that unused space. But it was making a statement, wasn't it? What was it saying about the culture of the school? What was it saying to visitors that arrived? And for me, it was saying that, it wasn't necessarily about the education. It was about making a huge grand statement. And I think if we just look at the architecture and look at the building, and now I'm not saying you need to design a building, you can even change the culture in a classroom. So if I, for instance, I've got my class, if I adjust, for instance, the seating arrangements, I can already change the culture or begin to change the culture. So you certainly wouldn't change just by changing the kind of seating arrangements. So I'm secondary based, but in primary, a lot of the time they'll have these group tables where they work really collaborative, and they have like four sets. And whereas in secondary, we kind of go for these rows where you kind of will separate you out. There's no talking. We'll kind of do those sorts of things. But think about what it's suggesting about that organisation. So one of the elements you can do is really think about how do we utilise the space of an organisation. Some things are, for instance, like where is the principal's office? Is one thing I'm always interested in. Where's the principal's office? Is the principal right at the front, away from the kind of rest of the body, or is the principal in the heart of it? Is the he or she in the heart of that organisation? For me, that's a really important indicator of a school's culture, because it tells me actually how does and I'm not knocking, like I'm just observing. I like to just observe. What does it suggest? If the principal's office is right at the front, away from the rest of the population, what does it suggest about what that principal or head teacher values? What does it suggest about how they run that organisation?
Yeah, I mean, it says that they don't want to be part of it. They don't want to be part of the day-to-day.
Yeah, I'm not even sure whether they're consciously aware of that, but I think that's what it suggests to people. That's what the kind of underlying thing. The other thing that I have a really big bugbear is where head teachers will have their own parking space. So like they'll have their own parking space, right? Yeah. And it will be signalled out that even if the head teacher is off at meetings, that's their parking space. What does that suggest? That they have their own parking space and no one else does? Does it suggest that they're more important, for instance? Does it suggest that they add more value? I just think that those are things that we really need to start thinking about in terms of, what does that suggest about the culture of the organisation? Is if you have your own parking space and everyone else has to find it out. So it's those sorts of things that I just think, what does that tell us about that organisation?
So the little things sort of tell a bit of a story, is what you're saying, really. I mean, it's interesting what you mentioned about the head teacher being separate from the school, because I worked at a school, the first school I worked at, where the head teacher, they had a bit of a change around in the school, and we had a building that was separate from the rest of the main school building. It was just like a little roadway between, and there was just a little sort of standalone sort of annex sort of building with a few offices and I think a toilet and that. And he moved himself and I think the senior leaders into this little building. And I remember, I mean, I was a young teacher at the time, and to me, I was thinking, I didn't really think much about it, but I remember a lot of the senior teachers using words like ivory tower, and things like that. And I thought, well, at the time, I suppose I thought, well, what's the problem? He's the head teacher, he can do what he wants. But actually, when he then moved on and another head teacher took over, the first thing that head teacher did is move himself back into the building. So actually, decisions like that. And I notice our head teacher, now I don't talk about our school and I certainly don't say the name of the school, but what was interesting about we've got a new head teacher who I rate very highly, I have to say. But she came in, and in the teacher's room, an office, there was one big, very grand, very expensive looking desk made of this, I don't know, antique wood. I mean, I'm not an expert in these things, but I imagine it was quite pricey. And when she moved in, and this desk dominated the room. There was nowhere else really you could sit. You couldn't get round the table. It wasn't the sort of table you could get around. It was just one big grand, look at me, I'm the head teacher desk. But the new head teacher, she just got some of the old Formica tables. She made a big table where lots of people could sit around, just the standard kids table that she'd taken from a classroom. The big desk has gone. And just that has made such a statement. She's saying, I don't want a big grand desk. I want a desk where you can get around and we can talk about things. So what you say just really resonates with me in terms of that. And obviously the school buildings, I've worked in some ridiculously designed buildings. I really look forward to the day where teachers could actually sit down with architects, take the work the architect has done, rip it up into a million pieces, put it in the bin and say, here's how you should do this, because we have to work here on a day-to-day, all right? So it sounds a little bit aggressive, doesn't it? You know, my daughters are both studying to be architects. So what I'm saying in case they're listening to this. But yeah, I think what you say really does resonate. Those little things.
But isn't it? I think it's all those little things that kind of add up to kind of give us this view of the culture. I think, do you know I've seen more recently with school buildings is the removal of a staff room. That's a trend in that what we're doing is we're and just to be clear, I'm just observing. I'm not saying one thing is better than the other. I think every person has to make their own decision. But I find it interesting that lots of them at the minute is we're going to have these workrooms dotted around, and we're going to remove a staff room. And I find that quite interesting because, on the one hand, removing them suggests we're all around the organisation and we are, you know, you can understand that strategic placement of helping to manage space and things like that. But then, I suppose the knock-on effect of that is you lose those opportunities for staff to talk and engage and support, and you know the well-being element of, you know, because sometimes when you've had a really tough class, it's always in year 9, you've had a tough year 9 class, you need a group of people just to build you back up, and that those are where those kind of coaching conversations happen, you know, and it seems like actually because we've lost an element of that we now have to do coaching in schools because those almost feel like they would have happened organically because we have a space for people to get together. So I do find the kind of arrangement of schools really insightful in terms of what they suggest, and then what leaders choose to spend money on is also equally important, and how they invest their resources in terms of what they prioritize, again, equally important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, certainly the staff room thing does really resonate. I remember again when I was training, I trained in Hull in an inner city school, a tough area. It had a central staff room. I mean, as a science teacher, we're often the sort of species that aren't so great with the social interaction and the sport.
Oh, come on, you're doing yourself disservice, all those scientists out.
And I'm also probably I've alienated everyone who watches Star Trek, and now I've alienated.
You're never going to get over that.
I'm not going to be able to show my face again in public, to be honest. Yeah, I'm still cringing when I think of it. But anyway, we'll have a chat after, John, and you're going to have to clue me in on it.
I will, yeah.
But yeah, so certainly I've noticed with the new design. I've worked in old buildings, I've worked in new buildings, and you're absolutely right. The design, and it is interesting, like you say, you've got to think, what is the purpose? And I've worked in schools where the purpose seems to be, let's impress people with what this looks like. Let's have a really grand sort of entrance. I mean, I worked in a school where open classrooms. I mean, come on now. I mean, we have some in where I work now, and the very first thing, again, the head teacher's done when she's come in is let's build a wall. You know, we invented walls for a reason, didn't we? But where I worked at this school, it had this really big room, really big sort of area. It was similar size to like even a small like sports hall. It's massive.
Wow.
And we used to manage it, because we had that space. We used to put 2 classes in there, and we taught them the 2 classes together with 2 teachers, one teaching, one facilitating. And I think in some schools that might have worked really well, but this was in a very deprived area with, I think, around about 2/3 of the students were pupil premium. And it was a very, very challenging area, and an area that close to where I'd lived myself for quite a long period of time. So I knew the area really, really well. But certainly but anyway, cut into the chase. The layout of the school was completely the opposite of what was actually required. And the other side of that is I worked at a school where it was a very old building. Again, it was a very tough area with a large council estate nearby. It was a challenge to work there, but they actually knocked the old school down and completely rebuilt a brand new school. But what they did was they just made a standard, I mean, I'm a science teacher, so it's labs we're talking about, but it was just the standard sort of lab layout. We did have rows, and that's another thing we could get into, rows versus groups. But it just worked. It was the basic layout. No one was trying to be flash, really. And day to day, it just worked a lot better. So, it is interesting to look at that. And obviously, it's something that I suppose some leaders are just kind of stuck with, aren't they? In terms of budget, it's not always something that you can change an awful lot.
Do you have a staff room at the moment?
We do have a staff room, but again, it's probably like a lot of schools where the only people that go there are the people who are in areas that are close to it. So we also have separate offices for staff. I mean, the only thing I would say as an upside of having those separate rooms, obviously you're closer to your working area, but for the students, we often get students come, like when we're not teaching, a student will knock on the door and they'll ask for something, and those interactions could be quite nice. And I think the students know that there's always someone else. Sometimes we're all teaching in its empty office, but you get that sort of feeling that the students have someone close by. They can, I don't know. That's quite a nice thing to have as well. But I think.
Yeah, but I think it's not saying one. I mean, it's certainly not advocating one approach is better than the other. I just think it's worth pointing out what those sorts of things suggest about the culture of the organisation. And I'm so not saying that every school needs a staff room, but what does it say in terms of what we value, or even if we have got one but it's not used, what does that suggest about the organisation? What does it suggest about what is valued, or what the staff value, or whether they don't value it? I mean, because there's kind of lots of different things that even the uniform and design of uniform, and that suggests a certain thing about what we're trying to communicate. The logo is the one that I always find really interesting, because you'll see a logo and it often will have motto or values written on them, and actually asking students what are your values. One, can they kind of tell you what those values are, or list them, and then two, being able to explain, well, what do they look like in practice? If these are our values, actually, what does that look like? I worked at one school where values became a really, really big thing, and they essentially built this monolith of literally, or they literally plastered up 50 different words which just related to like integrity, pride, resilience. They just shoved everything up there. I said, right, these are our values, and it was this huge like kind of monstrosity that was this first thing you saw as you walked in. But then the staff hadn't chosen those, the students hadn't chosen those. They meant nothing to the organisation. And where we do choose them, are they ingrained? Are they kind of, do people rule their decision making? So one leadership team I worked at, whenever they were making decisions, they would come back to the values, which I think is really important. If those values are important for your culture, if they're because obviously the values are linked with our culture, does our decision making, when we're making decisions, does it reflect whatever you value, whether it's resilience or integrity or whatever it is? When we're making those decisions, are we coming back to our values? Are they an important part of our decision making process? So I think there's kind of lots of different things that it's just being thoughtful about. Actually, what does that suggest about our school?
Yeah, absolutely. And often, so what you're saying is, I mean, I know I can relate to what you're saying. There'll be, slogans and mottos, and at the end of the day, if no one knows what it is, if you go and ask a student, what's the school motto, and they don't know, then what's the point? I mean, staff as well. So I suppose, just thinking, so assuming you've gone into a school, and I think I really like what you're saying about getting all that information from the different subgroups and the different subcultures and understanding it. So once you get to a point where you feel like you've got a better handle on the school culture, and you've identified that something needs to change with that culture, just say there's a real culture of bullying, or there's a culture of, the problem I have at my school at the moment is a culture of don't be a snitch. We don't snitch. There's a real no snitch culture amongst our students, and that's a big problem. So once you've identified an issue with the culture, where do you even start, John, with trying? Obviously it's not going to happen overnight, and it may not even happen in months, but what would you suggest a leader starts with once they've identified a problem with the culture in their school?
So I suppose it's understanding where does that come from? So why is the no snitch there? What's caused that to be something that is? I mean, it sounds like almost your school motto. That seems to be the thing that is said. So actually, where has that come from? Sometimes there's specific incidents, and an important part of the school is the stories that people tell. The stories, whether it's the gossip, those are your culture. So where has that no snitching come from? Because what sometimes happens is it's come from particular events where people might have relayed information, or students might have told kind of staff members, these are the issues, and actually that hasn't been held in confidence where necessary, and actually it's resulted in further issues. So it's kind of unpicking first where might that issue have come from, and there's normally a story behind it, or there was probably originally a story, but over time it's been reduced to just no snitching. I suppose part of it is then students understanding why it's important to pass information on. What's the value in that? I mean, it goes back to Simon Sinek, the why. Why do you need to pass that information on? And it sounds very much like there's a them and us kind of element in terms of the students against the kind of staff. So it's breaking down that barrier in terms of forming those relationships of because part of it is trust, isn't it? Trust that if you tell me something, I'm going to use that information in the most appropriate way. I mean, it's always good to get speakers in and to offer insight, lessons learned. But I think you have to start with understanding the story of why that exists, and then you're looking at all the different stakeholders. So if you want to change that mantra of no snitching, well, you're not just going to do that with the students. You're not just going to say to the students, we don't do that anymore. Actually, it's them understanding the why. It's then we're then looking at all holistically. Is that then embedded in curriculum work and PSHE and personal development in terms of why we do that information? Are we then building relationships? Is that then supported by your kind of teachers in terms of their approach? Your form tutors are massive. If they're building relationships with students over 5 years or lots of time, they should be building that mantra of we support. If your value is about honesty, for instance, I mean, it would suggest that is probably a value the school needs. Honesty is something that we need. That means to be our value, and we have to live and breathe that. We're honest in our communication. We're honest when things go wrong. We model that to students, and sometimes that about staff saying, actually, I could have done that better. I'm modeling to you the values I expect. But I think you have to look at the kind of whole package of if that is the fundamental issue of that school, then why isn't it a value? Why isn't honesty a value that actually says this is the thing that we are going to really look at? And I think another part of that is looking at the school development plan. If that is a significant issue, then what are all the avenues that we can address this issue through the school development plan? You know, being because you've got the culture, then the strategy comes after. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, quite a famous saying. But actually, if we've identified the kind of cultural element that we really want to look at, what's the strategy that behind that is going to address that? And that's done through it's ubiquitous, everyone being involved, you know, even to people that we spoke about in terms of, you know, whether it's the cleaners and the caterers, and they're supporting that as well. They're involved in this initiative, you know. And then I think also it's about praising heroes, you know, praising those that do the right thing, because there are so many heroes in an organization. You know, we're not talking about superheroes, we're just talking about people that do the right thing, and then praising that and celebrating that, because I think equally it's rewarding those that do the right thing, because too often we can be quite punitive, and actually what really engages students, and that's what the research says, that it's making them feel part of the community. And if they feel part of your community, then they're going to be honest with you, and they're going to, you have a relationship with them. Because what tends to happen is most schools will say, I'm not going to snitch. And you send your pastoral manager, whoever has that best relationship, and you get the information because they have that relationship and they trust that person. So I don't know what relationships are like, or whether there is a breakdown, but it's something that I do think it's an area to really explore. That why.
Yeah, I think you're on the right lines with your thinking there. I think there's a bit of a disconnect. If I have to, I mean, I don't know, and it'd be something that obviously, judging by what you've said, would be worth drilling down into. My feeling is our school went through some tough times where lots of staff left in a short space of time. There was a lot of cover, and I think there was a bit of a disconnect and a lack of trust. I think we work in an area, in a community where being able to trust your teacher is so important. And I think there'd been a real breakdown and a real misunderstanding about what we're trying to achieve.
I mean, it sounds like you've hit the nail on the head. The story behind that is that staff left, and those relationships that were built, that they went, you know, and no, you know, I'm certainly not criticizing staff leave, but obviously the students are still there. The person they rely on, that they built that relationship with, and in many cases being just as strong as relationships they might have with a family member, has gone. And so what do? They come in on themselves. They could, you know, there's a lack of engagement with staff. New people come in, and sometimes if an organization is challenging and hard work, people retracts. You know, they don't invest quite as much because it's like a defense mechanism, isn't it? It's you kind of go in it yourself. And so if that has happened and there's been a lot of staff movements, you can see why students might not want to engage, because why should I tell you and put myself potentially on the line if you're going to leave in 6 months? Why should I do that? You know, you can see why that is probably there. So hopefully one element will be that with more stable staffing, potentially those rapports and those relationships start to be built up. I think part of it is also engaging the community, you know, creating opportunities to engage with families, you know, get them on site. I mean, I think the primaries do it really well. I do think there's a lot that a secondary can learn from our primaries, you know, things like fates they have and the summer fairs. It's just you're removing barriers because they're coming into your space. They're coming onto your site, and you're reducing those barriers. And I think that's such an important part, which is, you know, the personal development element is one thing I do agree with Ofsted. I think it has so much potential value, and creating opportunities to kind of engage with families in the community, you know, getting them on site, getting them, you know, the not being this barrier. So, you know, and it's lovely when I've done it with my daughters, going into the primary and seeing them in their space. And seeing how happy they are or what they like, and actually me being part of that, it kind of removes that barrier. And I think also what it does is for parents, I think they're less likely to jump on and complain, and jump to a million miles per hour if they start to build that relationship because they're coming into that space. I was a head of sixth form for a long time, and I used to do tons of home visits, tons and tons of home visits, because I got to saw the family and I got to build a relationship with that family in their environment, and actually that breaks down those barriers, doesn't it, in terms of me saying that I'm going to give my time up to come into your space, to show that actually, you know, it's not about you just coming into me when I summon you, come have a parent meeting with me. I'm investing that time, and I'm going to come out to your house, and also the kind of communication is just calling when things are great, or just calling to see how you are. Sometimes you can preempt so many issues by just calling the family and say, I just want to check in, how you doing?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Absolutely. And that, you know, that's another disconnect I think that could be an issue, where especially when a school is then in a difficult situation, in a failing situation, then you need that buy-in. We've had a couple of comments, and I'm just going to sort of put them up in a set, John, and we'll just have a quick look at those. We've got a few coming in, a couple from Sam. Thank you, Sam. He's talking about he works in California, he's saying. So we're going to, before we move on, I'm just going to sort of put those comments on the screen in a moment. I just wanted to mention very quickly the John Catt Bookshop. This show is sponsored by John Catt Books. If you're interested in doing a little bit of professional development and some reading, then get yourself over to the John Catt Bookshop. And if you'd like 20% off your order, you can use the code JCTTR2425. So have a look up there. So, right. So let's have a look at some of these comments then. So Sam has put a couple of comments on. Now, his first one, do you have problems with illicit drug use? And the related snitching issues that come with that. So I think he's just sort of focusing on the snitching sort of aspect of that. I mean, fortunately, it's not something that I find a real problem in my school. The snitching issues in terms of my school are more of the low level, the bullying. The bullying is the really big problem in my school. Certainly not many in terms of the drug issues, and I'll ask John what he thinks about that in a minute. And then Sam has put a second comment. I work at a public primary school in California, and we have that frequent vandalization of washrooms and typical preteen drama. So again, vandalism, another big element of that. What did you think of those comments?
Yeah, I think the vandalism is really interesting, because it is at schools I've worked in. A lot of the time with IT, for instance, is quite an area that will often be vandalised. I think part of that is, I've seen schools be successful, is understanding the consequences behind that. Well, I mean, what it suggests from a cultural point of view is they don't value the space. Okay, they don't value it. They don't appreciate that space. So that's what it's kind of suggesting from that point of view. So it's then thinking about, well, how do we get them to value and appreciate that? What one school I was at essentially went through the kind of budget element and said, listen, I'm not going to be able to provide you with these things because of the cost of and explained the issue of what the damage caused, so the students could see actually where it led to, and it led to them having less things. So they kind of understood that value, but it suggests that they're not proud of their space, they're not proud of that community. So it's how do we make them feel part of that community? Obviously, one is about those events that we spoke about from the primaries, is getting them in, feeling part of it. And actually that's their school. So, and if they're damaging that, they're damaging their space. So I think it's just getting them to understand one, what are the consequences of that action, and then also about actually how do we get them to start valuing that space and that resource. But it is the kind of broken window analogy, isn't it? That once one window is broken and you kind of don't repair it, you just see more and more and more and more. So schools can tend to turn a blind eye, thinking, we'll just move on. But it's something that if it were me as a leadership team, I'd be getting everyone together and saying, actually, right, well, this is our problem. Let's do some exploratory work. Right, I want everyone to talk to people, talk to students, talk to staff, talk to the site who look after it. What do we know why this is happening? So let's go and assess what are people telling us about what, let's not make assumptions, because leaders will make assumptions really quickly because we're going to fix this really quickly. But actually let's start to talk to people and find out why are they doing this. And so it might be an apathy, it might be I don't value it. It actually could be a cry for help. It could be some students saying this is me telling you I need help, because sometimes that can happen. But I think it is really coming back to what we kind of discussed at the start, which is talking to people. Talking, because the more information you have, the more you understand. Absolutely.
And actually, Cynthia as well, thank you for your comment, Cynthia. I think she relating to our earlier, I think she's referring to what we said earlier about the non-snitching. And this is something that I was told when I came to work at the school I am now. One of the things we were told when we first came in on our induction, and it was nice to have an induction, actually. I think it was the first time I'd had a proper day for induction, which was obviously a good start. But one of the things they said was the students take their problems into the community from the school, but they also bring their problems from the community into the school. So actually what Cynthia says there about the cultural norm and them learning behaviour feeds into, I suppose, what you're saying about getting everyone on board, getting parents on board. I think
Cynthia's totally right. It is a cultural norm. It is ingrained in that school. That is how you behave, and because it's ingrained, that's why it's so hard to turn around. But I think you've already started to tell me some of those stories, which was probably led to that happening. And now you kind of understand perhaps some of the factors that have led to that. Then it's about how we use everything at our disposal to try and address it.
Yeah, and Sam's come back again, and actually, I think I will put this one up because this is one that I see a lot in my school: purposely breaking pencils.
Yeah,
and again, like you say, it seems like a little thing, but what is it they're saying? Like you said, is it a cry for help? Is it just because? Is it a release of frustration by that student? I mean, I tend to find some students, they get a pencil, snap. Yeah. So I actually buy the little ones, the ones that you get at the pitch and park, the little pencils. What's great about them is rather than give out a pen, which gets pulled apart and leaks and makes a mess, the little pencil, they can still work with it, but it's difficult to snap. So it kind of works. But and so
that's a really interesting comment from Sam. If they're breaking those pencils, I suppose it'd be interesting what the response to that is. Are they being constantly provided with a new one if it's broken? And because schools will do that just because here it is, get on with your work. But again, what does that suggest? It suggests to that child that they can break things and they will be replaced, and that behaviour then might become a norm, and you'll see them break other things because they'll assume it can be replaced. So I suppose what's come out of this conversation would be really interesting. It's those little things that can then magnify and build over time to become significant issues.
Absolutely, yeah. So that could be a sign. Sam has come back and said, "Good idea. Use the golf pencils." I definitely recommend the golf pencils. A little tip for you there, guys. But so he said as well, kids doing the Chromebook challenge where they purposely short out their battery. That's not one. I mean, what's interesting is Sam. It looks like Sam is from California, or teaches in California. So obviously, it's kind of nice to know that the students over there they're having similar issues to what we're having over here. So it just shows kids are kids, that they behave how they behave for a reason. We can't, there will be some kind of reason. It's not saying that it's never their fault and they should never take responsibility for it, obviously, because that's another debate, saying that all behavior is what is it? What is the phrase? I can't remember what it is. All behaviour is a sign of a need, or whatever, or so on. But it may not be a sign of a need, but it's certainly a sign of something, isn't it? It should tell you something. So I think that is a really useful sort of general message there from Jon, is you've got to dig down into what's going on. What is the reason for it? You can't just stand up in an assembly and say you can't do this. I mean, you can do that, obviously, and there should be some kind of consequence for the students who are vandalising and doing the bullying behaviour, when the perpetrators of that behaviour, when that person does report it. But obviously, that's a real challenge. But I think it is a trust. Issue, to be honest, and I think there is a bit of a disconnect between students and teachers sometimes. Particularly, I'm particularly interested at the moment in the transition between primary and secondary, because I think it seems like, I won't say we're getting it wrong, because we're doing what we've always done in secondary as they come up, but it seems to me like more students are becoming unhappy when they move up into secondary school. And I don't know really why, but it's something I have definitely noticed. And I don't know if it's changing needs. I don't know if it's post-COVID issues continuing to rear their head. What do you think about that, Jon? The transition and the coming up secondary? Because it sounds to me like you've been across both phases.
I mean, there's always the regression, isn't there? And it's something that you know, from a secondary point of view, it blows my mind when I see some of the work that, you know, some new year sevens might have done in year 6, and it's phenomenal, and then they'll come to secondary and there's this huge drop. I think part of it is it's perhaps they're in this really these much smaller bubbles where they're well known, where they have these really kind of solid relationships. The school is much smaller, and actually come into a much bigger organisation, you can get lost to a degree. Whereas, you know, their needs might have been met a bit quicker, a bit sooner, because there's a smaller kind of cohort. I think that can be part of it. I mean, what one of my kind of bugbears is communication from kind of family. So my daughter goes to a fairly large secondary, which is absolutely fine, but there isn't a great deal of communication in as my you know, even if she's got an okay, poorly, brilliantly, you know, you don't hear a great deal. So you don't have that same kind of relationship because of the size. And I'm not knocking, you know, what schools that are big, there's lots, it's a moving beast, there's lots of different moving parts. But I think part of the issue is that they do really go from having these kind of tight bubbles of you know, knowing almost everyone in that school, to then these big entities potentially. So I do think that's part of the problem, because I think most of us will recognise there's quite a lot of regression. I think part of that is what relationships do we have with the primaries? You know, how do we engage? I think it'd be harder depending upon if you have a lot of feeder schools trying to engage with them. But I think there seems to be an absence of relationships. So I can see the kind of benefit of almost like an all-through school. I can see that the kind of rationale through that, in that you're tracking the student from a very young age, and you have this information flow that comes through. And it'd be interesting to see whether we see less of that in that sort of environment.
Yeah, and just off the top of my head, I mean, maybe making more of the role of the form tutor, because one thing that does frustrate me a little bit, we are running a little over time, but we can spend a few more minutes. And it may be that we have to do another show, Jon, at some point. Who knows? But what frustrates me is people will say the form tutor is important, and that, which is true, and it's a point of contact for parents, because obviously it's a manageable group of parents if you're a form tutor that you can focus on keeping contact with. The problem is you're never given any time to do it, and you're not given a lot of time during the day to talk to the students. So if I have a form period, and a lot of schools do this, I'm not having a go at anyone in particular, and I can see why they do it, but there will be a program. There'll be a weekly program. So today it's the assembly, which is obviously important. Today it's reading, or some kind of reading, which also I totally agree is important. We've been doing this actual reading out loud rather than the silent reading that we're finding is working a bit better. But my point is, I don't really get time to go around and talk to the students. You know, how was your weekend? What did you do? And they may say, and something may think, oh, yeah, that's something I should probably ask about, or this has happened and I didn't know about that. So we're told that we're important as form tutors, but it doesn't feel like we actually have the time and opportunity to actually have the impact that we should be having as form tutors. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said of like a really low demand form time. There's the pressure to fill the time.
Yeah.
You know, there's because of the pressure of outcomes and Ofsted, there's a pressure we're going to fill that and make that really productive. What you and again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I think part of the consequence of that is you don't have those really solid relationships that you might have with the kind of low demand check-in, are you okay? Because it also gives you opportunity, if you know, especially in the morning, to pick up on any issues. You know, what might any issues be that I need to kind of preempt before that child begins that day. And I can see why schools do have a lots of elements that they'll cover in form time, and there's certainly an argument for that. But I do think sometimes being a real purposeful low demand form time, almost like a check-in of let me just see how that student is doing, can actually pay dividends for the kind of.
I think it could, and I can understand like you why we feel that need to, and then you'll have someone coming around and checking that you're doing a certain task, and it can be frustrating because you can think, well, actually, is it important that I do that task, or is it important that I actually find out what's going on in the lives of the students? Because it's something that we say, and again, I think we'll do, I'll probably do a show on it at some point, but we'll say stuff like, as teachers, we are more than just teachers. We have, before we've even started teaching them, we've got to be responsible for safeguarding their well-being, their safety, their health to some extent. So, but we don't have time for it. I mean, we are under pressure. We've got to use every moment of every lesson. I personally think we don't allow students enough downtime during the day, but that's my personal opinion. And I can understand why we've had to cut down on things like midday, because of midday supervision and other problems. But it just feels like something that we don't really have enough time to do. Obviously, we have a professional role, and we should never forget that our role is to educate. But there is a bit more to it, and I think we do need the scope, the time to be able to do it. But anyway, we'll just sort of mention a couple of closing things. Sam came back again just to mention the problems that we were talking about earlier being worldwide. He's saying his wife's in Peru. They're pulling the hair out over behaviours over there too. And his opinion is that there's an issue, social media and devices, which is obviously something that we could spend a lot of time talking about. So you've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio, guys, and I just want to thank very, very sincerely Dr. Jon Morris, who's been my guest for today. Is there anything I've missed, John, that you wanted to just sort of mention or sum up, or before we finish?
Thank you. I found it really, really interesting. It's been nice just to discuss. I suppose just the point I'm trying to talk about is let's not reduce culture to one-word phrases, and let's just find more opportunity to talk to all people in the organisation, because each of them will hold, a piece of that puzzle, which helps us understand what the culture is.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks ever so much for coming on, John. It's been really illuminating and interesting to talk to you. And I just want to thank everybody that has listened along. I want to thank Sam for coming in and getting involved with that, putting some comments in. He was watching via YouTube, and Cynthia, who was watching via LinkedIn, I believe. So obviously we're across several platforms here, guys, on Teachers Talk Radio, here on the Twilight Show. We have got to the end of our time. So just want to thank one last time to John for giving up your time this evening, and for coming on and giving us some real food for thought this evening. And that's it from us on Teachers Talk Radio on the Twilight Show, guys. So I hope you will have a very pleasant and hopefully slightly cooler evening. It's been so refreshing today to have a little bit of rain. It's been a really good day. Have a great evening, everyone. That is all from us, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time here on the Twilight Show. Good evening, everyone, and goodbye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.